Well, how to negotiate like a CEO. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you know how to negotiate like a CEO and protect yourself in the workplace? Today, author and attorney Jotham Stein is here today to talk about his book, Negotiate Like a CEO. Jotham, welcome to Prudent Money.
Thanks for having me on your show, Bob. Great to be here.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think that employees give a lot of thought, to protecting themselves in the workplace. Talk a little bit about what you mean by protection and why it's so important.
Not only employees, people who start companies, entrepreneurs also don't give a lot of thought to it at the beginning. And employees only really give a thought to it sort of after they've been mistreated down the road. What do I mean by protection? I mean doing what a CEO does before they join a company. That's the name of the book, Negotiate Like a CEO. What do? They negotiate their separation agreement, their severance agreement, their exit agreement, whatever you want to call it, their protection on day one before they join employment. And what exactly does that entail? It usually entails like an agreement that says if you terminate my employment, typically without cause, then you'll pay me a certain amount of severance when you show me the door. That you'll pay some of my COBRA premium payments so that I'll have health care when you show me the door. And for those people who are getting equity, that's a fancy word for stock options, restricted stock, profits, interest. You get your protection is to get accelerated vesting of some of your shares when you're let go. And most people live in at-will employment states, where the employer can terminate the employee for any reason or no reason at all, with or without notice, with or without cause, except for a legal reason like discrimination. And that happens so often in the employment relationship. We all hope it'll never happen, but as a practical matter, it happens a lot, especially over a lifetime of having jobs and working in employment. And that's what most people don't protect themselves against.
You know, Jonathan, this book is a real eye-opener. I mean, things you just don't think about, but so important to make sure that you're protecting yourself. What kind of reaction have you gotten from the average employee that says, I didn't really know any of this before I read your book?
I mean, I don't have a reaction from any of the employees until they read the book. And once they read the book, they say, wow. Those that are just starting out are like, wow, do I have to look out for all of this stuff? Thanks for letting me know. But what's really interesting are the employees who've been out there for a while, in mid-level of their career, mid-level management, and they say, wow, I've left so much on the table. I wish I had this book, when I started. And I've actually had retirees read the book after the fact and tell me, listen, I left so much on the table. I thought I was doing a great job during my career. I didn't realize I could have protected myself. So it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. There's sort of two main reasons. One is to bring all my experience of 25 plus years representing, employees, mid-level managers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, to give them the information they need and open up their eyes. It's like an insurance policy in the beginning, before they take all these jobs and perhaps have a bad experience in employment.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm talking to Jotham Stein about a great book, Negotiate Like a CEO. I was just curious, Jotham, is it easier or harder today to protect yourself? I mean, in the way the corporate landscape is at this point.
Well, that is a really tough question, and I'm not sure I can answer that because so much of your ability to protect yourself is context dependent. So where you are in your career, what the company is you're joining, how much they need employees, where you are in the country. Certain contracts and certain clauses are accepted. They're just normal course of business in certain parts of the country. In other parts of the country, they've never seen it before, and so you'd wind up with more resistance. even the kinds of protection can differ, with such a large country with different, sort of business sectors and business areas. So I can't, even though I've been doing it for more than 25 years, I can't really answer that question. And in any event, everybody's in a different situation.
Sure.
So everybody has to judge their own situation. They could use a book, for example, to judge their own situation and how they should negotiate. Because so the title of your show, Prudent Money. I mean, what's prudent money? What does that mean? People to look out for themselves, for their families, to help build their careers, and that's what my book's about. Watching over yourself, sort of, as you negotiate or as you go into an employment relationship, as you read the tea leaves in those relationships, and those tea leaves can be great, or they can be bad, or they can be in the middle. And if they're great, how to negotiate better deals for yourself, what to look out for. And if they're not so great or poor, you want to see those tea leaves early so you can go get a job or change your career or start a new company if you're an entrepreneur before things go really bad.
It was interesting because you write that boards, bosses, investors, employers, those making decisions that affect your life and employment, act irrationally all the time. How can someone prepare ahead of time to face an irrational decision made by those above them?
So ahead of time, it's very difficult. Although I talk about in the book doing your due diligence. Who is your boss going to be? Who are your bosses going to be? Who are your investors going to be if you're an entrepreneur? If you can do that and learn more about your position in advance, you'll have at least learned what your potential downside risks are. The issue when you have an irrational boss who might fire you for, even though you're doing a great job, that's what that means. And there's lots of reasons that happens. The most important thing is to read the tea leaves, to understand that the signals you're being given are sometimes a signal that even though you're doing a great job, I don't want you, meaning the boss doesn't want you, or the organization doesn't want you, but not necessarily the company. So that's the most important thing once you're in a position, is to know, to have your eyes wide open and to understand that sometimes no matter how good you are, it's not going to work out at a company. Not because you're not doing a great job, not because you're not a really nice person or a good person or a good employee, but because the boss doesn't want you there for any number of reasons. And I'll use the most sort of economically rational reason from the company's point of view, but from the boss's point of view, it makes sense. Let's say you're so good you threaten the boss, and the boss is the kind of person that's really worried that they might lose their job. Well, that's happened many times where that boss who's really worried they might lose their job because the subordinate is so good, it's sort of showing them up in their own mind. They fire the subordinate so that they can, increase their life expectancy at the company for a year or two. So if the shareholders could vote in that situation, they'd vote against the termination of the subordinate's employment. They'd vote in favor of terminating the boss's employment. But that's practically not the way organizations work. And so I just give that as one example of irrationality in employment that you could suffer from, your listeners could suffer from, that they'd want to understand what those tea leaves are right away, so they recognize that they'll have to get a job somewhere else before they get hurt by the superior doing the economically irrational thing.
And Jotham, early on in your book, you hint that one way to protect yourself is by asking yourself if the job ahead of you reflects your personality. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
So everybody has different personalities. I mean, your listeners come from many different shapes, sizes, perspectives, and even ability to socialize, to get along, and so forth in different ways. And some people are good in certain environments, and other people are good in other environments. Well, companies too also have like a kind of way of doing business often. Some more explicit than others, and sometimes just managers of certain departments have a certain way of doing business. So, for example, if you're a person that likes collaboration in employment and collaborating with your employees, but you're working for a boss who's a yes man or yes woman, you have to say what they want, and there's no real collaboration. They're sort of a miniaturized dictator, and that only likes yes people. That might not be the right job for you. And the only way you're going to know that is to do as best as you can, to do interviews, to find people who've worked for that boss before you take employment, take the job. And listen, some people have no choice. They have to feed themselves. They have to feed their family. They only have one choice. and they go into a situation regardless, because they only have one choice. But if you have more than one choice, more than an ability, sometimes you're better off for you, your family, and your mindset, and living a good life, turning down a job and going to the next job or the next opportunity because the situation isn't right for you. The personalities aren't right.
You know what's interesting is that people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to attorneys, and you may find yourself in a situation where you need one. What are some tips that you have on finding an attorney you can trust after being taken advantage of by a company?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I should say there are actually people out there. Before I answer your question, and I have clients who hate attorneys. They don't want to be an attorney. I have clients that call me up and tell me that have been my clients for 20 years. They can't stand attorneys. But when it comes to negotiating their own deal, either as an entrepreneur to protect themselves for investors
Right.
in a transaction or as an employee, who do they call? They call me and my colleagues, and I'll tell you they are some of the best clients because they actually listen to what you have to say and they act on it because they are they don't like lawyers, but they know why they're calling one. And when I go out to take them out to lunch, I always wind up paying because they hate lawyers. So they're the kind that say you can pay. But so I just want to tell you that there are lots of people that hate lawyers, but they know when they need one. And the ways to find lawyers, probably the best way is to, if you are in this position, ask the person across the aisle, metaphorically across the aisle, if they know who the best person is on the other side. So what do I mean by that? If you have a relationship with a general counsel or somebody who runs a company, for example, or is a senior at a company, and you ask them, who's the best person to represent employees? Who do you know that's good? And get a number of names from them if you can. Because they often know the good lawyers and the bad lawyers on the other side. And some of them might hate the lawyer on the other side, not because they're a bad person, but because they're actually good at what they do, and give you their name. Another way is to ask your colleagues, your listeners should ask their colleagues or friends who've been in similar situations who they use and get their honest feedback from them. And some people that they know will have terrible lawyers or people that didn't really help them, and they would avoid those. But some will have good ones, and they'll recommend them in the community. So one thing I want to say here is that one of the things I often tell clients who come to me or people who are struggling in employment, they see the writing on the wall, they're being forced out, mistreated, is that you are not alone or getting fired. You are not alone. A lot of people don't like to talk about employment or certainly if things are going wrong, but I can tell you that there are tons of people out there who have been fired, mistreated, forced out, have passive-aggressive bosses. And I'm pretty confident some of your listeners, assuming they have a lot of friends and colleagues, some of those friends and colleagues have faced similar situations. They may not know about it because nobody wants to talk about that kind of thing. But if they were to take a poll or speak with all of their friends and colleagues, they'd find out that other people have been in their situation before, and probably multiple people they know. So when these things happen, it's important to get a good lawyer. And for those looking for one, you might have to go outside your personal comfort zone and speak with your trusted friends and colleagues about whether they've ever experienced a situation like this and who their lawyer was that they used.
Jotham, I was talking to somebody earlier today who had a really, really bad experience with a financial advisor. And obviously that happens in all occupations and industries, and especially, maybe a bad experience with an attorney. How would you advise them to go about if they've got that just kind of lingering around in the back of their mind?
Well, first, two things. First is if they're having problems in employment or you're an entrepreneur, business person, started a company, and the investors are taking advantage of you, you need a good lawyer because there's lots of bad lawyers out there. So you need a good one, and then you should try to find a good one, even though you've been sort of burned or had a bad experience before. As to people who've had a bad experience, if they just had a bad experience, but the lawyer hasn't been totally terrible, that has committed some sort of malpractice, that's just, it's a bad experience that's happened. You have to find a better lawyer. Use that as a lesson to get a bigger, better not necessarily bigger, but a better lawyer next time, and to ask those questions, tough questions sometimes to the lawyers, and try to get beyond the sort of marketing lawyer and get to somebody who knows what they're talking about. If they committed real malpractice, or if they've done something unethical, like taken money from the client, then you should be the person has to go and either find a lawyer who does malpractice, or report the lawyer to the state bar if or the jurisdiction. If you're somebody who's listening to the DC, it would be the DC bar, for example, or the jurisdiction bar that's responsible for attorney oversight. But if you just had a bad attorney, use that as an experience to try to get a good attorney. And another way, I didn't mention, and I'll mention it now if you don't mind me taking
Sure, go ahead.
the time. Another way to get a good lawyer, or a lawyer in your community that's good, that might be able to help you, is to ask a friend, if you know any friends who are lawyers. And don't ask them who their friend is. Tell them straight up, I don't want to hear about your friend, and don't ask them who they hear about, in the street or something. Ask them who is good in the area that you need a lawyer in. So, and that could be, like, for example, I don't practice wills and trust and estates, but somebody asks me a wills and trust and estates lawyer, I give them referrals to people I know in this jurisdiction where I practice. And if I don't know anybody in a particular area of the law, then I don't give a referral. Or I might call friends of mine who know. So lawyers often know who's good in other areas that they don't practice in. So you want to be sure, as the listener going to ask a lawyer friend, you don't want your lawyer friend necessarily to represent you. You want him or her to help you find somebody good in the particular area you need. And we're talking about employment, the employment world, maybe the equity world for people who are entrepreneurs. And frankly, in the person who called you up and told you about the bad financial advisor, as you know, there are lawyers that practice representing sort of wronged investors in the financial industry world. There's people who concentrate or specialize in that.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today, talking to Jotham Stein about his book, Negotiate Like a CEO. And Jotham, I'm sure this is something that just about everybody listening can relate to, and it's written documents and the protection that those provide, or maybe not provide. Explain the difference between an offer letter and an employment agreement, and when you should look for in terms of protection.
So an offer letter and an employment agreement typically mean an offer letter is 1, 2, 3 pages long. An employment agreement is typically 6, 10, 12, 20 pages long. So one is, think of the employment agreement as the pure bells and whistles and all the extra stuff than an offer letter. They make no difference, as I point out in my book, in terms of protecting yourself. You can have a 2-page offer letter that, if it has the right language in it, protects you more than the longest employment agreement. And that's really important to know, because if you get a 2 or 3 page offer letter, or 1-page offer letter, you can put in more protective things in there. You focus on what's important to you, which is protecting yourself. What I said before, getting severance pay if you get terminated without cause and don't walk to the door, COBRA premium payments, equity protection, other things that may be important to you. For example, extended car allowance, or if you have a loan, that your loan doesn't get called away, called right away if you get terminated from employment. Whatever it is, you could put it in a 2 or 3 page offer letter, 1-page offer letter, just as much as in an employment agreement. That's much longer. So whether they're really indistinguishable in terms of your listener or the employee trying to protect themselves, or the entrepreneur or your listener trying to protect themselves. What they really mean is essentially, what's generally meant is an offer letter is just a 1 or 2, 3 pages, and an employment agreement typically associated with C-suite executives, can run 6 pages, 8 pages, 15 pages, whatnot.
Let's talk a little bit about commission or bonus plans, and make sure that they understand the details. What do you look for in those particular documents?
So in a commission or bonus plan, you want to know, as the employee, the best thing to have are non-discretionary, because you want to know that you're going to get whatever the commission or bonus is. So, and with metrics or triggers. or sometimes called management-based objectives, whatever they are, so that you know that when you hit that commission, when you hit that level, whatever the trigger is, you get paid. Same thing in a bonus plan. If you have a specific metric that can be judged, you know when you hit it. Your company knows when you hit it. That is the most protective situation you can be in, because I can't tell you how many commission and bonus disputes happen over unclear language, over supposedly ambiguous language, and people wind up losing lots and lots of money, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions of dollars, because they believe they've met the trigger, but it wasn't defined enough in the agreement. So think of it this way: the more specific any contract is, the less disputes there'll be down the road. So a commission or bonus plan is no different. And if you're the commission-based employee or a bonus-based employee, and that's important to you, then the more specific you can have, given to you by the company and signed by you, the more specific the metric is, the goal is, whatever it is, the performance target is, whatever it's called in your commission plan or bonus plan, the better off you're going to be, generally speaking.
Jotham, I've got about a minute and a half left, and I wanted to get to this one question because I had never really heard of this term before. In the section of the book you call "Watch Out for Clawbacks," you express that the money you earned and spent can be taken back. Explain the legalities of this, maybe how it happens, and what to focus on in an employer's clawback policies. I know it's kind of a big question and unfair to only give you a minute and a half, but just talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so for most employees, not at the C-suite level, and in many states, you can't take back your earned wages. I want to be clear about that. But there are certain managerial levels, all the way up to C-suite levels, where the federal government requires that money be clawed back, taken back that's been earned. Typically, if something goes wrong with the company later on, and there's a report, like in a publicly traded company, to the SEC, and the company says, okay, because of your wrongdoing or because it was on your clock, we can claw back, take back payments, compensation that's been given to you. Typically, it's in the form of bonuses that have been paid or equity. And what I mean by that is stock. Let's say the stock has gone way up, think of it that way. Somebody sold their stock, they made a whole giant profit, the kind you read about in the papers, and then half a year later they find out that there was some wrongdoing at the company caused by the person who sold the stock. The company might have a voluntary policy, that is, everybody signed off to it, or under certain circumstances, there's federal law that requires, in certain circumstances, a clawback be imposed.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. The book is entitled "Negotiate Like a CEO." It talks about really everything that you need to know. And Jotham, congratulations on your book, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much, Bob, for having me on your show. It's been great.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. It's so interesting reading some of this book, looking through everything that Jotham has got jotted down in here as far as details and things you need to be careful about, and just things you just don't think of. And I think when it comes to employment, the thing we're really thinking about is, am I going to get hired or not? Everything will work itself out. You got to read the details and make sure that everything is going to be okay for you. Once again, negotiate like a CEO, Jotham Stein. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.